Hey, it's Dave here. In today's video, we're diving into one of Home Assistant's most underrated but powerful features, scenes. Whether you want to set the perfect movie night or instantly reset your lights, scenes can make it happen. Let's break it all down, step by step. Before we jump into the actual setup, let me quickly walk you through what scenes are, how they work, and the different actions you can use. I'm going to bring up some slides to give you a quick overview. Scenes. Think of a scene like a saved snapshot of your devices and settings. Later on, you can activate it in an automation to instantly bring back everything the way you set it. Why use scenes? Scenes are a great way to save time by reusing common setups. For example, you might have a bedtime mode that turns off your lights, and instead of setting that up every time, you can just save it at once as a scene. Scenes also makes it super easy to trigger the same outcome across different automations. Maybe you want your lights to turn off both when you go to bed and when you leave your house. With a scene, you don't have to program it twice. This helps you avoid repeating the same device settings over and over, making your automations simpler and easier to manage. So in short, scenes saves you time, reduces mistakes, and keeps everything nice and tidy. As a quick example, you could create a bedtime mode scene once and then reuse it in both your good night and leaving home automations. With scenes, there are 5 key functions you should know about: activate, create, apply, delete, and reload. Activating a scene means setting all the devices to their saved states at once. You do this with scene.turn-on. There's no scene.turn-off because scenes are about setting a target state, not toggling. Create. Creating a scene means taking a snapshot of a device state you want, like lights turn on, TV source set, and saving it, so you can easily activate it later. Apply. Applying a scene is like sending a one-time scene without actually saving it first. You just pass in device state directly in the automation, which is quicker for temporary setups. Apply. Applying a scene is like sending a one-time scene without actually saving it first. You just pass in a device state directly in the automation, which is quicker for temporary setups. Delete, as you expected, deletes a scene simply by removing a saved scene you no longer want, either from your YAML file or from your Home Assistant UI. Reload reloads scenes whenever you make a change, like adding, deleting, or editing an existing scene, so Home Assistant updates to the latest version without needing a full restart. For example, imagine you have a scene that turns off 2 lights and dims another one to 30% brightness. If you later adjust the light manually to 20% brightness and want that new scene setting, you'd update that scene configuration and simply reload scenes. So next time you activate it, it uses the new 20% setting automatically. Before we move on to the next slide, I just want to make something clear. Scenes that you create from the Home Assistant Scenes UI can only be edited or deleted from the UI. They cannot be deleted using the scenes.delete action. Scenes created from the scene.create action will show in the Scenes UI, but you won't be able to edit or delete them there. To delete those dynamically created scenes, you have to use the scene.delete action. Don't worry if this sounds confusing, I will show you exactly how this works inside Home Assistant in a moment. Here's a quick look at the difference in YAML between applying a scene and manually controlling each device. With Apply Scene, everything is bundled nicely into one action. Without it, you're calling a bunch of different services one at a time, which can get messy fast. I'm now going to walk you through creating a scene using the user interface. If you go to Settings, then go to Automation and Scenes, then go to the Scenes tab, and on the bottom right, click Create Scene. I'm just going to give it a name Cinema Mode. Icon and area is optional, but I'm just going to type in cinema and see what comes up. And you've got a theatre icon. Area, I'm just going to leave blank. Now I'm going to go to entities and add a series of lights and curtains. Some of these lights are technically switches, but they actually control a light. Now I've added all the appropriate entities for that scene. I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And now I'm going to come out of that scene. Now there's one thing that might catch you out is if you change the settings of those entities and then go back into that scene to make changes. I'm just going to very quickly open up a second tab. So what I'm going to do now is just change some of those lights. Kitchen, lounge, and dining room. Now I'm going to go back into that scene. And you'll notice when I press this live edit button, keep your eyes out on this part here. You'll see as I'm toddling between one and the other, the lights keep going off and on. This is something that caught me out and I wasn't sure what's going on, but it's because when you go into edit mode, it's defaulting to whatever the state was of those entities when you created that scene. And because I changed the state of those entities and now I'm going to live edit, it's defaulting back to what they were. So just in case you find as you're toddling, the lights are going off and on, that's the reason why. Now I want these devices to be a particular setting, so I'm going to go ahead and click Live Edit. And what I want is all the lights in my room to turn off, but I want the dining room light, which is dimmable, to be at 10%. So from here, I'm going to go ahead, make sure all those lights are turned off, which they are. I'm going to turn dining room light to on, and then I'm going to click on it. And I just want to set this to 10% brightness. I can close that. And I also want to make sure that the curtains are already closed. And in this case, you can see they've already closed because I've got the choice of open. So all the entities are exactly as I want them. I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And just in case you're wondering, you're only going to see that save icon when the state of the entity changes. So I'm just going to click on one of these devices again. So just keep your eye out on this particular part here. And I'm just going to change the state of one of those entities. So let's just change dining room to off. You're now going to see that save button appears. I'm going to put it back to how it was because I wanted dining room to be on and I wanted it to be 10%, which it still is. That's good. I'm going to click Save. And now I can just come out of that. And I've got a scene created with the correct state of how I want it. Now I'm going to show you how to create a scene using scene.create. If you head over to Developer Tools, then go to the Actions tab. Change that to go to UI mode if not already. And then just do a search for scene. And it should give you these options. And the one we want is scenes create. Scene entity ID is just the name you want to call the scene. I'm going to make this do exactly the same thing as the other scene, but I'm just going to give it a different name. So I'm going to call it Cinema Mode 2. Now you're going to notice there's two options below, Entity States and Entities Snapshot. Entity States is basically where you're choosing a list of entities, but they're not already in the state you want them to be when creating the scene. Entities Snapshot is where you're selecting a list of entities where they're already in the current state. And that option is a lot easier because you haven't got to mess around with the YAML. I'm going to start off with Entities States. And in this example, I'm going to choose most of the devices, but one of the lights which is dimmable, I'm going to manually specify the state I want it to be, because I want this to not only be on, but at 10%. I'm going to check that box. So I'm going to paste in the name of that entity ID. Then I'm going to put a colon at the end, then press enter, and then I'm going to double space with 2 indentations, and I'm going to set the state and the brightness. So I'm going to type in state, then add a colon, space, on with double quotes. Then I'm going to go to the next line and set the value of brightness. Add another colon and the number of 10. I'm also going to add the kitchen light in while I'm at it. So I'm just going to remove the indentation. The kitchen light is actually known as a switch, but it's a switch that controls the light. So I'm going to paste the entity ID in for the kitchen light, add a colon, and I'm just going to add the value off in double quotes. This particular switch isn't dimmable, so all it's going to have is switch turn off. Now I'm going to go to Entity Snapshots, and this is way more intuitive because you don't need to know any YAML. So I'm just going to add the remaining devices. And just before I create this scene, I'm just going to go to YAML mode, just so you can see what the YAML looks like for all of this. So from here, you can see action scene.create. Scene ID is what the name is, which is cinema_mode 2. Then you've got the entities section, which is not only specifying the entities, but the value they need to be set to. In this case, I've got light, which is turning on with the brightness of 10%. And it's also specifying the switch, which is also a kitchen light. And it's just setting the value to off. Then you've got the snapshot entities, which are the ones that are already in the value I want them to be. And it just needs to reference those entities. Once you've done that, you're just going to go ahead and click Perform Action. And you've got that green tick, which is looking good. Now that we've created that scene, I'm just going to go back into Scenes so I can show you it. Go to Settings. Go to Automations and Scenes. And if you go to the Scenes tab, here you can see the 2 scenes I've created. And cinema_mode 2 is the one we created using scene.create. Now there's a couple things you want to watch out for here. When you hover over to the one we made through the GUI, all of these menu options are available. I can duplicate, I can delete it, I can apply. When you hover over the one I created using scene.create, it will show this message saying only scenes defined in scenes.yaml are editable. And to add more headaches, you can't delete it either. So in order to delete it, you're going to have to do scene.delete. So personally, I would create the scenes using the UI. Unless you're really comfortable with YAML, you're adding more headaches than it's worth. Another thing which is a bit odd is you'll see here you've got a menu called Apply. In YAML, Apply is actually used when you're temporarily creating a scene to just sort of run once, which is a little bit like an automation, but slightly less code or shorter YAML. but for some reason it's called apply here, and it doesn't actually apply the scene. What it's doing is it's activating the scene. I wouldn't be surprised if in newer versions of Home Assistant they might rename this from apply to activate. If I just zoom out and I'm going to click the apply button, just have a look on the bottom center of the screen. You can see there it says activated scene cinema mode. So that just seems a bit misleading. Why is it called apply when really it should be called activate? So quite likely that menu name might be changed later in the future. I'm going to show you how to delete the scene, both ones which are created from the UI and ones which are created using scene.create. As I said earlier, the top one was created from the UI, so that's easy. You just click on those three dots and you click delete, and then click delete again to confirm. And now that's gone. Unfortunately, you can't delete the one you created using scene.create. So you're going to have to run scene.delete in order to achieve this. If you go to Developer Tools, go to the Actions tab. I'm just going to clear what's already on the screen. If you go into UI mode and just type in scene, and the one we want is obviously scenes delete, then click on choose entity. And you can see there's the one we made using scene.create, which is cinema_mode 2. Click on that. Just before I perform action, I'm just going to switch into YAML mode, just so you can see the code. So there it is, action scene.delete, and then the entity ID is the name of that scene, which is scene.cinema_mode 2. I'm now going to go ahead and click perform action. We've got a green tick, so that's all good. Now we're going to go back into settings, go to automations and scenes, then go to scenes, and you can now see it's been successfully deleted. Now that we've created a scene, we're going to go ahead and create an automation to activate that scene. If you go to settings, then go to automations and scenes. On the bottom right, click create automation, then click create new automation, and we're going to click add trigger. From here, I'm going to select entity, and I'm going to select state. In this example, I'm using a Zigbee vibration sensor, so I'm just going to do a search for it. And the one I'm looking for is this binary sensor, vibration sensor couch vibration. So I'm going to click on that. And the trigger is going to be when it goes from clear to detected or from off to on. So I'm going to select from off. And you'll probably notice as I select off, it automatically changes it to clear. That's perfectly fine. And it's going to be the same with on. That's now, you can now see on has gone to detected. I'm going to scroll down. And under then do, I'm going to click add action. And in a search field, if you just do a search for scene, and the option we want is scenes activate. And if you click choose entity, in this example, I've only created one scene, but you would have more if you had. So I'm going to select scene cinema mode. And just before I save that, I'm going to show you the configuration.yaml. If you click on the three vertical dots here and just go to edit in YAML, you can see that's the code. You've got the entity ID showing here. The trigger is state change. You'll notice in the YAML it says from off to on instead of from clear to detected. but that's fine. The action is scene.turn-on, and then the entity ID is the scene that it's enabling, which is scene.cinema. This option here where it says mode single, that basically just means that if that automation is triggered while it's already running, it won't be interrupted. I'm now going to go back to the user interface mode. And then on the bottom right, I'm just going to go ahead and click save. It's then going to give me a choice of giving it a name. I'm just going to call it cinema mode and then click save. And that's the automation created. If you want to, you can actually click on these three dots and you can choose run action, which will launch the scene just to confirm it's working. I've also got the vibration sensor next to me, and if I just give it a nudge, you'll see there it says triggered. So that's all looking good. In this demonstration, you can just see me sitting down eating a bag of popcorn, and I really hope my PT doesn't see this because I'm going to get such a telling off. And you may not be able to notice it, but on the right side of the couch, you can see the vibration sensor, which I'm about to whack. And as soon as I've hit that, the kitchen lights and the lounge lights will turn off, the curtains will close, and this may not be too noticeable, but the dining room light is actually going to go from 100% to 10% brightness. I'm now going to demonstrate using scene.apply. Basically what you're actually doing is just creating an automation, but it's a little bit more efficient and the code is slightly shorter. If you go to settings, then you're going to go to automations and scenes, and then on the bottom right, click create automation, then click create new automation. Now I'm going to give it a trigger, click add trigger. I'm going to select entity, and it's going to be change of state. I'm now going to search for that vibration sensor, and the condition is going to be when it goes from clear to detected. Now I'm going to go to then do. I'm going to select add action. In the search action, you're going to type scene and select scenes apply. Now, though this is done in the UI, to be honest, it's not much different just doing it straight from YAML, because in this particular section here, you have to write YAML. There is no drop-down menu. With scene.apply, you have to not only specify the entity, but you have to specify the entity state, and it's going to force you to do this in YAML. I'm just going to quickly select the devices I want. So I'm going to start off with the lights, and then you just have to add a colon space and then the entity state. Now for curtains, for this to work, I have to specify the state as closed or open. If I make it on or off, it doesn't appear to work. It's probably because this is a cover and that's just the way it is. I'm adding quotes in between to just make it a string. However, I have also tried not adding quotes and it still works anyway. I'm just going to add the switches now and then colon at the end. And I want these to turn off. And the last one's a bit more complicated because this is a light and I don't only want it to turn on, but I want the brightness to be 10%. So the way you do this is you paste in the entity ID, add a colon, and then you're going to go to a new line and it'll be 2 indentations. Then I'm going to type in state and make it on. And I'm also going to specify brightness and have that as 10. Because 10 is a number, I'm not going to have the quotes because I don't want it to be a string. However, I have tried all different variations of adding quotes or not adding quotes, and it actually still works perfectly fine. If I just zoom out and scroll down, You're also going to see transition is another feature, and that primarily that's applying to lights, because you may have a movie mode scene or something else, and you want the lights, instead of just to immediately dim, you might want them to dim over the period of 10 seconds or longer. It's quite possible if you've got a sound system, there might also be a function on there where if you had something like party mode, it would also set the sound where the music would gradually go up to a certain percentage or the music would gradually go down. I don't know if that is or isn't a thing because I haven't got a sound system to confirm it, but I wouldn't be surprised if transition isn't just limited to lighting, but possibly sound systems as well. I'm now going to go ahead and click save. And then I'm just going to give it a name. And I'm just going to call it demo scene apply and click save. Now, before I come out of that, I'm just going to show you the whole YAML. So if you click on those three dots here and then select edit in YAML, you'll see here you've got, this is the name. It's then checking the state of the binary sensor, which is a vibration sensor, when it goes from off to on. I did specify clear to detected, but in YAML it's actually known as off and on. Then you've got action, scene.apply. And here you'll see all the entities are specified in one place with their state afterwards. Make note of that because I'm going to show you a comparison shortly on how that would look if it was an automation. And then you've got transition here, which is 10 seconds. But for this particular example, that only applies to the light. Mode is set to single. That just means that if the automation is triggered while it's already running, it will just ignore it. In this image, you can see a standard automation created achieving the same outcome as the scene.apply we just did earlier. When using scene.apply, you're triggering one single action that applies a group of entity states at once, kind of like pressing a preset button. Everything, lights, covers, switches, etc., is all defined in one place under entities. If you look on the left at standard automation, in contrast, when using an automation without scene.apply, you need to define a separate action for each service domain, like cover.closeCover, light.turn-on, or switch turn off, and then specify the target entities and decide state individually for each one. Although it may not look too much bigger in comparison to the one on the right, if you just imagine you've got various different service domains and you're adding them, it's soon going to become a lot less manageable, whereas scene.apply, straight away, it's just so much cleaner and easier to work with. Reloading scenes is something you'd do if you made changes to the scenes.yaml file. I'm just going to very quickly navigate to that to show you what that is. If you go into File Editor, and from the configuration.yaml file, if I zoom in, you'll see here you've got scene and it's been split to go to include scenes.yaml. I'm now going to head over to that file. So I'm just going to go to Browse File System, scroll down and look for that file, which is this one here. And that is the scenes.yaml. Now, I wouldn't recommend making changes to this file unless you're really confident at YAML, because if you get something wrong here, then all of the scenes you've made from the scenes UI will be broken. So personally, I would just stay away from this. I'm now going to come out of that. There's two ways you can reload the scene. You can go to Developer Tools, make sure you're on the YAML tab, and you should see about halfway down, you'll see a scenes button you can press, and it will automatically reload the scenes from that scenes.yaml. The other method is from the Actions tab, which is actually more steps. You're just going to type in a search for scene, and then you'll see there, scenes reload is one of the options, and then you would go ahead and press perform action. I'm just going to click on go to YAML mode so you can see that's the actual YAML you would use. It's just action scene.reload, and then you just click perform action. Now, I might be wrong in what I'm about to say, but I believe when scenes first came into Home Assistant, you initially had to restart Home Assistant for changes to actually apply. Then at some point, I think the action scene.reload was created, so you didn't have to restart Home Assistant, you could just run that command. And then later on, the developers added that scene button from the YAML tab, which is this one here. That would make sense because otherwise there's not really much point having a scene button and then also an action scene.reload, which is more steps, because I can't really think of an obvious way why you'd want to do that, unless perhaps you've got some really fancy complex scripts and automations that's constantly making changes to the scenes.yaml file, and then you want it additionally to reload the scenes afterwards. But for most people, it's easier to just reload scenes by going to Developer Tools, go to the YAML tab and click Scenes. I'm now going to show you how to add a scene to your dashboard. If you click on the Edit Scene icon, then you're going to click Add Card. Change this to by entity, and in the search just type in scene, and the one I want in this example is cinema mode. Then you're going to go ahead and click continue, then click add to dashboard, and I'm just going to move the location of where this has been placed. So I'm going to change this number to 5. Now you can click done. And you'll see here we've got the cinema mode button, and before I press that, what it's going to do is, if you keep your eyes out on this section, it's going to turn the kitchen light off, the lounge light off, the dining room is going to change to on at 10% brightness, and it's going to close all of these curtains. So I'm just going to go ahead and press activate, and you can see those lights have turned off straight away. The dining room is now turned on, and that's correctly at 10% brightness. 2 of the curtains have opened, and then the final center curtain has also opened. So that's working as I want. And if I just change the state again, turn a few of these on, if I just open one of these curtains, just wait for it to take effect. And now I'm just going to press activate again. You can see straight away it's going back to the scene I wanted it to. I'm now going to show you a kind of workaround to revert to a previous scene. In this example, you can see 2 scenes on the dashboard with an off or on switch. The way this works is it captures the state of some of the entities and saves them into a temporary scene before activating the current on scene. And then when you turn it off, it will automatically activate that temporary scene, effectively reverting back to the previous scene. I'm just going to turn on bedtime mode, and what this will do is turn off all the lights, which you can see in this section here. So if I go ahead and click on that, you'll see the lights have now turned off, and if I just press it to off, the lights have now gone back on again. So it's essentially undone that scene. Cinema mode is quite similar. What that does is it will turn the lounge light off, the kitchen light off, and it will also close these curtains and set the dining room light here to 10% brightness. I'm just going to change it to something completely different just so we can see that's working. So if I now turn on cinema mode, you can see that lounge is turned off and the kitchen. And if I go to dining room, it's now on 10% brightness. If I now turn it off, you can see it's reverted back and the dining room's back to 100%. Another thing you can do is if I turn on bedroom and I don't turn that off and I now turn on cinema, what it's going to do is it's going to capture the current entity status, then it's going to turn on cinema mode, and it will also turn off that checkbox for bedtime, so that's now off. And I can do the same the other way around. This will turn on bedtime mode, and the cinema mode button will turn off. Now, in order for all this to work, you're going to need to create an input boolean for every scene and an additional input boolean just for getting around turning the switches off and on. You're also going to need to create a script that builds a temporary scene by capturing the state of all of the entities used in the scenes that exist in your Home Assistant environment. We're going to start off by creating the input booleans. You can see here I've got bedtime mode and cinema mode, so I'm going to be creating those two and an additional one. If you go to File Editor, now in my configuration.yaml setup, you'll see here my input boolean is actually split up into a folder called config and then input boolean. If that wasn't the case and you were doing it within your configuration.yaml, then you're going to save the changes here. But because I've split it, I'm going to navigate to that folder. I'm now going to go to Browse File System, look for that config folder, and then I'm going to look for the input boolean folder, which is here. Now you can see I've already made them. I've made bedtime mode, so I'm just going to click on that. And it's just going to have the entity name, and the icon, which is optional. Now, if you didn't split this and you were saving this within your configuration.yaml file, it would look slightly different. It would have the input boolean at the top, and the indentation would look something like that. And then for the next one you're adding, it's going to look like that. But because that's not the case, I'm just going to go ahead and close that because I don't need to save changes. And I'm going to go into the other one, which is cinema mode. Just going to click close file because I didn't need to save any changes. And you can see cinema mode is exactly the same convention. The extra one you'll need to create, and it will make more sense later on, is it's called change_scene. There's going to be a condition when you change the state from the input booleans from on to off. There will be a condition in the automation to determine whether to run the automation or not, but it will make sense shortly. So I'm just going to come out of that. Once you have saved those input booleans, you're then going to need to head over to Developer Tools. Just check the configuration is fine. And if you scroll down and look for input booleans, and you're going to want to click on that to restart it. Otherwise, they're not going to exist. Once you've created that, the next thing you're going to want to do is set up a script. If you go into Settings, then go to Automations and Scenes, then go to the Script tab. And this is the script I've created earlier. If I just click into it, and you can see here it's scene.create. I've just given it the name entity ID previous, and I've referenced all the entities that are being used in my current scenes. If later on you create a new scene and it has one of the entities that isn't listed, you will need to add it into there and then save the script. I'm just going to show you the YAML of what it looks like. So if you click on those three dots and then click Edit in YAML, that is the YAML for the script. It's just create scene, it's going to call it previous, and this is a list of all the entities. Now when you create this script, you don't need to worry about the state these entities are in. You just need to create it for now. If I just come back out of that, When you have created this script, even though you don't need it right now, if you just go ahead and click run, what that will do is it will create the scene. You'll need that scene to exist because when you're creating the automations, you won't be able to select that scene to run because the script hasn't ever ran, the scene doesn't run, and then you won't be able to create that initial automation. Because if I go to scenes, I should see one here called previous. And just to let you know what the script name is, if you click on that script, and if you go to the three dots here, go to information, and then click on that settings button, you can see it's script.previous_scene. Now I'm going to take you to the automations. So if you go to the automations tab, and you're going to need 2 automations for every scene. I've got one here called bedtime mode on, which is going to activate the scene bedtime mode and do some additional things as well. And then when you turn the input boolean bedtime mode off, it's going to trigger this automation, which will then go to the previous scene state. These two are basically doing identically the same thing, but just for cinema mode. I'm now going to go into this automation first and just show you how it works. So you'll see here you're going to have a condition, which is when the input boolean bedtime mode goes from off to on. It's then going to call the script previous scene, which will create a scene with that name, and it's going to capture the state of all the entities used from your scenes. Then it's going to change all the input booleans of the other scenes you have. In this example, I've got one called cinema mode, and it's going to turn it to off. Now this would cause a problem because as soon as that goes to off, that's going to revert to the previous scene state. So to get around that, I've added this section here where it's creating an input boolean called change scene, and it's going to turn that to the value off. Then it's going to activate the scene bedtime mode, and then the input boolean change scene is going to revert back to on. I'm just going to show you the configuration.yaml because it's a bit easier to explain. So you can see here, the condition is when input boolean bedtime mode goes from off to on. It's then going to call the script, which is going to create a scene and capture all the state of the entities that exist for your scenes. It's then going to change input boolean change scene, and that's going to be set to off. Then it's going to change the state of input boolean of every other scene you have. And because I've only got one, it's cinema mode, and that's going to be set to off. Then it's going to turn on the scene bedtime mode, and then input boolean turn on is referring to this one here, which is change scene. It's just going to turn it back to on again. I'm now going to show you the opposite side of when the switch turns off. So if I come out of that automation, I'm now going to go into the one called bedtime mode previous state. So you can see here, it's when bedtime mode goes from on to off. It's then going to have additional condition to check if change scene is on. If it's not, it won't do anything. And then it's going to activate previous state. And then it's going to activate the scene known as previous, which is what the script would have made. I'm just going to show you the YAML. So if I just go on these 3 dots, edit in YAML. So there you can see that's a condition when input boolean bedtime mode goes from on to off. It's then going to check if input boolean change scene is on, and if that is, it's then going to turn on a scene which is previous. So let's just say you had loads of lights on, you turn bedtime mode on, it's going to turn the lights off, and if you then turn bedtime mode off, it's going to go back to exactly what it was just before you hit that button. One thing to watch out for with this method is while I can turn bedtime mode on and you'll see the lights turn off and then I can turn it back off again, if you do this too quickly, what happens is it tries to capture the state of the entities before you've turned it back off again, and it ends up capturing a state of a device has been turned off. I'm just going to try and simulate this. So you can see there, because I did it so quickly, now when I'm toggling between off and on, it's not working because it's captured the previous states when they were off. So to fix that, you just have to turn that mode off, put the lights how they were, and now you can see it's working again. But if you do it too quickly, it's going to break it. And that's a wrap on scenes in Home Assistant. You've now seen how to set them up, and you understand the difference between create, activate, apply, delete, and reload, plus a handy workaround for restoring a previous scene. If this helped, drop a like or consider subscribing. And if you've got any questions or want to show off your scenes, join the conversations in the comments section or hop into my Discord channel. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.